lectures for Unit 6, segments 1 and 2. Okay, so we're in the 220 intro class. We have all of the lecture quizzes for the Deaf History notes, and we're preparing for the last two. And this, if you didn't already know, and if you're only finding out by this video, that's kind of a strange arrangement. But here's the link to get to the other lectures, just in case you missed them. And this lecture will be right after the Unit 5 lecture on deaf power. So here's a book, Unit 6, the interpreting process, and we start with the Nuremberg trials. Why do we start with Nuremberg? Because interpreting probably has gone on for millennia, but it was never really considered a profession. It was something that bilingual or multilingual people did, and maybe they got reimbursed for it, or maybe they were part of a negotiation team. But the whole point that you'd have a multi or bilingual person was because somebody was traveling, and probably they were traveling for the purpose of trade, to get as much gold as they could for as little tea as possible, or some such thing, maybe the reverse. And so that's the likely history, which is not terribly interesting. And we really start when we talk about the history of interpreting. When we talk about simultaneous interpreting, we have to start with Nuremberg as a significant technological advance that allowed systematic approach, and a lot of the systems that are in place today, things that we as sign language interpreters also make use of, how interpreters are regarded in the court, the expectations in the court, which sign language interpreters don't always follow, things like that. So what was Nuremberg? Nuremberg was the city in Germany that had not been totally devastated and was chosen as a place for the war trials. And this was kind of a unique thing because back in the day when you had a war, whoever won crushed the living daylights out of their opponents. Even after victory, you would just kind of take everything, which usually led to a follow-up war. And so people were starting to figure out that, maybe we shouldn't punish everybody. Maybe we should punish the people who instigated the war and did war crimes, and not just because you're wearing a uniform do you automatically get punished. We need to have a trial. We need to have trials, and we need to have witnesses and evidence and attorneys and judges, and we need to be fair as fair as possibly can. And it's a multilingual situation. You had the Germans. We're talking about German side. We're not talking about Japanese side. So you had Germans, Russians, Americans and British, and French. You also had Italians, and you might have had various other African languages, but the bulk of the powers of authority when we were all done were French, Russian, and English, and it was all German soldiers that were being tried, or Germans that were being tried. So how do you do this? How do you do simultaneous interpreting in spoken languages? It's not hard for a sign language, even sign language to sign language, to do simultaneous interpreting, because there's no interference with the channel and the mode. In other words, if I'm generating a sign language and I do it using a tactile or a visual modality, all you have to do to not have interference is not look at or not touch that message. If I have a spoken language and I'm using an auditory channel, now that creates noise in the auditory channel for any other spoken language. So how do I have, say, a German testimony that is simultaneously put into Russian, English, and French without overlap, noise, and interference? Well, you probably thought, well, I'll just use my iPod. Okay, we use the predecessor of the iPod, which is headphones and microphones. And the International Business Machines Company, otherwise known as IBM, came up with a 4-channel electronic sound system. 4 channels is convenient because you got 4 languages. So you have one language of input. So whatever language the testimony is in is on its channel. So you say you have a German person speaking testimony. You don't need an interpreter for that. That's the source language, but you would tune to the German channel to hear that guy. If you were looking for French, you would turn to the French channel, the English channel, which haha, and then the Russian channel. Okay, so here's some. You really should read this section. It's fascinating. It's problem solving at some of the greatest, because you're talking about how do you have a fair trial for people in different languages without slowing down the whole system. So here we have the testimony, the recollections of one of the interpreters involved. Said they had teams of 12 interpreters for the trial, 3 persons on each of the 4 languages. They were located in booths divided by glass panels. I just saw this video that shows how it was set up. They're not the booths that these are not the booths you're looking for. They're not the booths that I was thinking. I was thinking glass paneled booths in the back of the room. These things are right up front, and I don't know how soundproof they would have been. Let's take a look at what the system looked like. Let's take a look at what the system looked like. Here we go.
A multilingual, simultaneous interpreting system. It's very simple. On the witness stand, the defendant Gödel, who signed the German surrender agreements, speaks in German. His words are carried directly to the earphones of the interpreters. This gentleman, while Gödel is speaking, interprets his words into French. At the same time, this lady interprets into Russian, and this lady into English. Their interpretations, with Gödel's German, are carried directly to every seat in the court. And the speaker, who may speak in any of the 4 court languages, may speak from any microphone. One here is for the lawyers, and here are the ones for the judges. There's no particular limit to the number of microphones. And so with this system, no matter where you are sitting, or no matter who is speaking, you can follow the proceedings of the court in any of the 4 court languages. Colonel Doster, who hired and trained the interpreters, was obtained through the foresight of Justice Jackson and General Gill, and it's thanks to them that this system is in use in the court.
Was the danger of the situation discussed?
La situation. Oui, Göring a dit que pendant ce temps, la situation était devenue très grave.
When did you then meet Göring?
Et alors, je suis arrivé à Berlin le 24. Et j'ai vu Göring à 14 heures.
What took
Okay,
place during
that kind of leaves out part of the process, which is that he's hearing in his headphones the English version. So we only hear his question, the French interpretation, the French response, and then the next question. And so we should, to complete the picture, we should hear the interpretation in English, but maybe they don't want to make sure that it was accurate. I didn't say that out loud. Okay, so let's see. How many Germans bought Hitler's pitch? Actually, that was a real issue. Okay, lots of interesting stuff to see here, but that's not our point. Let's get back to the show. So, that setup at the Nuremberg trials basically became the forerunner of how do you have simultaneous interpreting. And the United Nations, I visited once, and they have various rooms, massive meeting rooms, and each of them has, I think, at least the one I saw, had a booth in the back wall, glass panels, so you had a clear view of the speaker's lectern, and because they'd be facing the audience, and there was a light system. You had a green, yellow, and red light system, which the way it was explained was, if the light is green, then the interpretation is going okay, and the people get feedback that I can trust that my message is getting out to the other members here because the light is green. When the light is yellow, It's intended to be slow down, hang on just a minute, we're falling behind and we need to be able to catch up, which of course the speakers immediately ignore. And so then you have the red light, which means that stop, because we are so far behind we risk losing the integrity of the message. And of course the speakers immediately plow forward, and then you have the beyond red light system, which is pounding on the glass, right? And so that's the ultimate. When there's pounding on the glass in the back of the room, it's not Dustin Hoffman at the wedding. It is the interpreter saying, "Hold it right there, buddy, because we know where you live, and we're coming after you." No, not that at all. But basically, it's worse than a red light. It's you have ignored us entirely, and we are unable to accommodate your communication with your peers here. And basically, we're if you don't stop, we will. So there we go. That's kind of the setup, and that's my understanding. That's how the setup continues at the United Nations and similar multilingual organizations. All right, here's this wonderful word, which it's an interesting thing if you look it up. I encourage you to look it up. It's the right word for what we're talking about. It's just that it's been adopted, maybe abused, by the people who channel spirits from other worlds. But we're talking about transcommunications. So one person's communication through me will be communicated to another person, and vice versa, right? And that is the right label because language is a subset of communication. If we're only doing trans linguification or whatever the equivalent would be, I'm a linguist, I can make up words, but that doesn't mean they get adopted. Transcommunication is a bigger picture, while translation or interpreting are smaller pictures. And my point is, I need you to keep the bigger picture in mind, that there is more to the message than just the language parts. There are things that co-occur with language. There are what we call paralinguistics. Is that language? And there's an argument then. Well, some would say, well, it's paralinguistic, it's part of the language system. And I would say, no, it's communication. It's part of the communication system. Language is one part of it. Paralinguistics is another part of it. Things co-occur. Messages get sent and understood in ways beyond just what the word said. And therefore, a good interpretation will pay attention to all of the communication, not just the language part. Okay, so that's the broader picture, which then includes this kind of work, which I'm calling elucidation, mostly because I can't find any other references to it, and so we got to start somewhere. So elucidation, by my definition, is working between well, here we go. It's right here. Elucidation is the transcommunication, right? I'm bringing back and forth between two parties, of a message between a language and something other than language. So if I'm using a manual English code, then elucidation is taking place, not translation, not interpreting. If I have somebody who's visually, gesturally trying to communicate because they don't share a language with anybody in a room, or they don't have a language, which is also possible, then that is elucidation, because assuming that I complete the process with a language on the other side. I don't know that we need a label for going from less than a language to some other less than a language, right? If somebody's using visual gestural communication and I'm transcommunicating that message into a manual English code, why? I guess I could. I mean, I'm transcommunicating. Do I need this special label for that kind? I don't think it occurs often enough that it's necessary. Elucidation does take place, probably on a daily basis in our court systems, that we have people who are language deprived or immigrants or in some other way, maybe they've had brain injuries, and they're not capable of having language, but they are witnesses, victims, perpetrators, and they are in court system and they need to have access to the information around them. And so usually that provision of service, if they are deaf, we do with a certified deaf interpreter, or a deaf interpreter. A DI, a CDI is actually a kind of certification. A DI is the general label, whether they're certified by the RID or not. We'll get there. So elucidation does not include communication between two people who use gestures directly. Right, we're talking about transcommunication. somebody else generates source text, and somebody else receives my version of that final message. So that's elucidation. That begins the process. That's alingual transcommunication. That one side of it is not a language, alingual. Bilingual means I've got one language on one side and a different language on the other side. And so I've got some choices. The big two are interpreting and translating. And to understand that difference, I need to know what is a variable or a fixed text. Right? Right now, I am generating a variable text because I don't have a script. I'm just telling you stuff. But I'm making a document. It's a video recording. And every time you play the video recording, it will be the same. So I have created, in the process, a fixed text. So there's both going on. The variable text is live at the moment. The fixed text is what you're watching. And that means that a fixed text could be used in a translation process. And that's what we call it. So translation is going to get defined later. No, because I got interpreting up front. Where's the translation definition? Well, I don't have the definition up front, so we'll go with the interpreting definition. So interpreting is an interactive, keyword, interactive exchange of information between two languages in which the interpreter right now actively creates spontaneous, not entirely pre-planned, target texts which maintain the information and intent of their respected variable source text. So you're not interpreting simple. Now you know it's a very complex process. Interactive exchange, two languages, spontaneous text, variable text. And you also maintain the intention. Okay. Interpreting can be subdivided largely into consecutive and simultaneous work. And so that's the idea of this picture here. Let's go to the previous picture. So the previous picture was I have some source text happens and it concludes, and then some target text is generated. That's actually a model of consecutive work. So here's our simultaneous work, that while some of the source text is still being produced, I generate some of the target text. Right? Key difference there. It's not that the entire target text is overlapped. There's probably a beginning bit of silence on the interpreter's part, and we hope there's some silence in the source text part where we can wrap up and finish up and have a conclusion before the next segment starts. So here's an example. So source text would go for a while, the target would go, and then let's say it's a dialogue. This would be a monologue, right? One person's talking, one person's talking, one person's talking, and I'm busy catching up all the time. In a dialogue, one person talks and then they don't talk, and I'm still talking, and then the other guy that I'm talking to, he starts talking, and I start talking the other way, and then they stop, and then I keep going, and then I stop, and then the other guy starts, and then you get it. Okay. So consecutive interpreting gives me a break, right? I start here, I go here, and then they can start here and go here, and then they can start here and I go here. Right? I don't have any overlap of any segments, and why would I care? Because if I'm busy with overlapping segments, I am stressing my brain. And I might be okay the better I can predict, but if I don't know for sure what's going on, I'm likely to say some bizarre things and be stretching to try to find a vocabulary for things I'm not sure what the meaning is. And so I want consecutive work as much as possible. So that was a dialogue back and forth, and you can do consecutive processing of a monologue. One person talks, and then either the translator says, not translator, transcommunicator, the interpreter says, "Yo, hold it right there, buddy. Don't say another syllable." Or they've got a plan. I'll do my first paragraph and stop, and wait for you to stop so I can do my second paragraph, or my third sentence, fourth sentence, however you want to divide it up. I won't talk while you're doing your job, but don't do your job while I'm talking either. Or at least not visibly, audibly. Translation. So this is the other side of that equation. It's a bilingual task. There's only two languages involved, but I am, with more time, able to explore, research, plan my final version of some source text. So I have an extensive review, an evaluation of a fixed source text in one language, and then the creation of a fixed target text in a different language, maintaining, as we did before, the information and intent of the source. Okay, that's bilingual. So we had alingual, we had bilingual. There is indeed something in between, monolingual processing. I'm going from one form of a language to another form of the same language. Right? I'm going from English to English, or from ASL to ASL. That's transliterating. It's a real thing. It's largely, historically, been used mostly in dictionaries. So you've got a language that has a writing system different than what you're used to, Chinese, Russian, Arabic. And so you would have a transliteration in the dictionary, which you would see the symbols for the new language, and you'd say, what do I do with that? And then you see the transliteration. Say, okay, so I'm not sure which part is which, but I say this sequence of sounds, and that's that word. Yes, that's transliterating, because you still don't know, just from that, what the sequence of sounds means. And so probably in a good dictionary, a bilingual dictionary, you'll have, the source language. You probably looked up a word, and then you have various meanings of the word might be defined. But then you have a sample word, okay, and then you have transliteration. So I want to say, I don't know, pomegranate, and I look up pomegranate in my Russian English dictionary, and I see a funky looking sequence of letters that I'm not quite sure how to follow. And let's see if I have that one in here. And I have the different example up front. I should have just used that one. All right, forget pomegranate. You get that example when you're live with me. We're going to do Rostov-na-Donu. Okay, so I'm looking at a map, and I see Paktabha something Anu. And so if I know Cyrillic, I can pronounce it. If I transliterate it, or I have someone transliterate it for me, I can see that that's an R. Rostov-na-Donu. Rostov-na-Donu. Okay, there we go. I've transliterated it. Job done. But what does Rostov-na-Donu mean? In this case, it's just the name of a city. So it's in English, it's Rostov on the Don, because na means on the, and Don is a river. So it's Rostov on the River Don. Rostov-na-Donu. But if I had, let's go back to pomegranate and granat. That was that, like, I gave it away. So I'd have a series of symbols that, if I transliterate them, I realize they're pronounced granat, granat. Okay, but I don't know necessarily that a pomegranate is a granat in Russian, and vice versa, until I look up the translation that says granat means pomegranate. And actually, grenade ends up being related to the size and shape of a pomegranate. Okay, but don't eat a grenade. In fact, I suggest you don't even obtain one. Transliteration of monologic discourse. I've got a source text, I've got a target text. It's the same language, but I'm processing it in some way so that it becomes accessible. Right? I could be writing it in Cyrillic letters. I don't know why I would do that unless I had somebody who could read Russian and wanted to know, how do I write down what they're saying? Okay, but why wouldn't I just use the American Roman letters? I can have a transliteration of simultaneous dialogic discourse. So while you're talking, I generate a target text. While my other person is talking, I generate a different target text, and back and forth. Okay. So the idea here is that a transliteration does not cross the language barrier. It's being processed, but it's being processed from the source language to the same target language. It is a one-language deal. The point of it is that some form of access is being given. So what kinds of access can I have? Well, I could transcribe into written English. That's something that actually happens. You get court reporters and people trained in court reporting who provide live captioning. And this is what you see on your news events. For that matter, it's what you see on your television shows that are captioned, except that wasn't done live. It was scripted. Usually because the actors are saying something that was scripted too. But you have a script at the end of the show regardless, and that's what's The captionist puts up and says, "Who's speaking? Where are they on the screen?" Okay, we'll put the caption there. Okay, who's speaking this one? They're over here. Okay. So that's transliteration. It would be English to English work. And here's another version. We have queued language transliteration. Notice that I slow down when I do that. I'm not fluent in speedy queuing. I'm also not very fluent in speedy queue reading at all, but I can be useful in various environments where a queuer wants to know what's going on and they know the language of what's going on. So, for example, you have a queuing person at NTID, National Technical Institute for the Deaf. Well, that's great and everything, but attached to that is RIT. So they might be an RIT student, but they have to have interpreting services through NTID. It's a federal contract deal. All right. They don't want to have to go to a second language to understand what's going on in their native language. They're a native English user. They just can't hear it. And so the book is in English, the lecture is in English, the test is in English. Can you just give me the English version of what's going on, not interpreted into ASL so that I have to know ASL to bring it right back into the English that it had started in? And the answer for a long time was no. And then the person that actually worked for doing this, I lovingly referred to her as the lawsuit. So I believe a family member was an attorney, and they made the lawsuit. And it doesn't matter if anybody in the family was. They sued. RIT settled out of court, and that meant that provision for transliteration services was provided for this one deaf person, and not systematically for anybody else. Which I think sucks, but nonetheless, that's how I ended up doing some of this work at NTID. So I was working from English into English, and I was working from English into English. But it was a matter of giving access in queuing, or a matter of giving access in spoken sound from the queuing. Suppose I'm working with a deafblind consumer, and they need tactile services. They cannot see well enough to visually perceive the language, so we're going to tactily perceive it by having the hands touch the hands of a signer. And that person would be transliterating if the message is also in ASL. So you have a deaf organization, and they have a deafblind member, and we have transliterator going from ASL to tactile ASL for the deafblind person. And when they want to make a comment or make an amendment, say to a motion, they simply stand up and sign. They don't have to tactily sign it back to somebody. They can sign that's perceived visually by everybody else in the room. So they really only need the services as an input device, not an output device, which is an interesting thing to notice. That's not always the case. Some deafblind people need further assistance than that. I can use the computer-assisted real-time transcription, which we just talked about with the court reporters, and overlay the captioning on maybe a projection of the speaker, or the person addressing the group. So you take your video camera, you put it on the main person who's signing at the moment, and then underneath, we hope not in front of their hands, you have the captioning of what their signing means. And that would be a bilingual task. What if it was an English message, and you're speaking English, and I simply encode that into English? Okay, so that would be a monolingual task, English to written English, and so forth. Okay, transcoding natural and artificial pigeons. So if I've got a, let's just go with the artificial pigeon. Okay, if I have a natural pigeon, we know that that's not technically language yet. But it's very rare that I'm going to work with somebody who knows a pigeon and not end up having a Creole of it. It only takes about 4 years for the Creole to start to develop. But it's possible. It's theoretically possible I could have a pigeon user who hasn't Creolized it, and it really still is a pigeon. That would be a natural pigeon. An artificial pigeon would be manual English code, C1, C2, love, and MSN, so. There's other stuff out there that has been created. Okay, so I go from the source language to the thing, and I keep doing that. That would be a monologic consecutive processing for a lecture. I could go back and forth between it, dialogic, and you get the picture on that. So we need to learn some specifics. about the field of interpreting, and we start with the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, which was founded in 1964, same year the Beatles came to America, but it wasn't founded in JFK Airport. It was founded at Ball State University, Ball State Teachers College at the time, in Muncie, Indiana. And the reason that there's a range is that that's when the workshop took place. There was a workshop going on the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th of June, in the summer of 1964. The Beatles weren't playing there. I don't know where they were in the world at that point. I'm sure you could find out. So there was a workshop going on for people who did interpreting work at this gathering of researchers and advocates who had a lot of interaction with the rehab centers for deaf people in various states. So you've got a government program in place. Deaf people are going to apply for a job, and I need to make sure there's an interpreter. You know, they're going to go to Chicago, but I don't live in Chicago. They don't live in Chicago, and they don't. There's not enough money to send me with them to interpret for them. So I need to find somebody in Chicago who can do the interpreting of this job interview. I need a registry of interpreters for the deaf. And so this problem was brought up at the workshop. People talked about it, and an effort was made to get started. And the place that really it was housed as a non-profit, no charge for using the office services, based out of the National Association of the Deaf's facilities. So they had secretarial support, they had files and physical place for mail, all of that provided by the NAD, and the goal here was to build up a list of interpreters. Well, how do you do that? Well, first you have to have people say that they know how to interpret, and second, I guess you kind of need a few people to say, yeah, they're right, they can. Initially, it started off as whoever was at that meeting, and then the process would be if you can get two people who are already certified to say that you're worthy of being certified, then you can get certified, and you can be half of somebody else's two people. And it didn't take long for a whole bunch of people to say, you're in, you're in, you're in, and you too. And so you had a whole bunch of people in the system who may not have been really qualified to be in the system, but they were now. And at some point, people said, you know what, we need to test these skills. We can't just go by on hearsay whether, yeah, he's got good skills. Well, have you ever seen him interpret? I don't know. He's a nice guy. So it needed to go to, can you actually do this? So we began certification testing. And let's see, meetings were held every 2 years, and then another years because of the RAD conferences were every 2 years. Anyway, the RAD has its national offices. At the time that this book was written, well, I thought they had already moved by then. Pretty close to the time of this, they were still in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is where the NAD national offices, I believe, still are. And then they moved to a location in Virginia, which was because they could afford to buy the building, and it seemed like a good move at the time, and I'm thinking it probably was. Ease of access through the metro and all kinds of fun stuff. So what does RAD do? Well, RAD tests interpreters and is about to give up that process, but they will still certify interpreters, and that's the unusual thing, that they are one of the few places where you get certified by a test that they also administer. Usually some entity administers the test, you get your scores on it, that's reported to the agency that issues the certification. If they're high enough, you get certified. If they're not, well, thanks for trying. You can keep on trying over at the other place. Yeah, so that's half of it, a good half of it, of what RAD is. The other majority of it is that RAD supports the workshops and training that gives certified interpreters the right to continue to interpret through Certification Maintenance Program, CMP. And, certification continuing education units are how many hours of each piece of training are required for you to maintain your certification. And basically it comes down to one piece. You have to have a minimum number of, I think, 7 hours of professional training every 4 years. And you need to have another hour of anything. And the anything is not really restricted. It just needs to be some kind of training. Okay, that's great, and that's most people are able to comply with that, although there is usually a flurry of activity in the final months before any given group has to submit their paperwork. Okay, RAD also has special interest groups, so they may be on different kinds of consumers we work with, such as the deaf-blind consumers interest group. They may be on kind of people you are already, so you have the I talk interpreters and translators of color. Yes, okay. And you have or various organizations that deal with um, uh, Latin community, Hispanic, and Spanish-speaking populations who also use sign language and have deaf members. Um, so, although that's its own group now. I don't know if it started off as a special interest group. Anyway, okay, so fine. RAD's Code of Ethics. This is not the Code of Ethics that RAD currently uses, but it is not a bad one to study. And so the idea that interpreters shall keep all information about the assignment confidential. That's always going to be an element, no matter what revision of the Code of Ethics you ever have. It's not your information. It's not your meeting. It's their meeting. Two people are meeting at a certain time. It is information to be exchanged between the two of them. It needs to function as though I wasn't there, which is a lie. Of course, I am there. If I wasn't there, there would have been no point for the others to be there because they couldn't communicate directly between themselves. But yet, we look at that as a starting point. Did I gain or learn anything that I wouldn't have been able to find out, say, online? Is there anything in that situation of being live, interactively with people, that leads to, oh, I've got some inside information that I wouldn't have had otherwise? You're not to act on that information. You're not to reveal that information to other people. Although this does not stand up in court. So if you are interpreting for people who aren't protected in any other way in the court, then you can be compelled to testify. Well, what did they say in the room while you were, interpreting between the mother and the defendant? Well, he said he didn't do it, and blah, blah. Right. You would have to actually provide the testimony to the best of your memory because the attorney had left. If you had been in the room with the attorney, you would have had that cloak of not immunity, confidentiality, that the court cannot compel a person to reveal what was said in conversations with their attorney or with their doctor or with their spouse and so forth. Certain things are protected. Interpreters doing their normal work, not protected in the court. So be careful what you let yourself overhear. You might put yourself in a situation that, hey, I wasn't even able to hear what they were saying. Okay, we will question you. Faithful rendering of the message. Don't counsel or provide personal opinions, but your professional opinion is always what you're doing. It's always your professional opinion that this is what they meant, and this is what they said, and I'll behave, to the professional limit, whatever I need to, if I need to. Okay, interpreters and translators shall not counsel, advise, or interject personal opinions. That's a good idea. Again, personal opinions are, did we just do this? This is what I was just doing. The personal opinion is, it's a good car, you should buy it. Right? The professional opinion is, I think he's lying about the quality of the car. Because the way he said it and the mannerisms, the extra communication stuff around the language tells me that I think he's lying, that it might not be the best car to buy. But if I just like the car, that's a personal opinion. Let's see. Use discretion according to skill. This is not in the current version of Code of Ethics, and it should be. and we've got a new version coming out. We'll see if it makes it back in. That if the job's overwhelming, you shouldn't take the job. If the job's only slightly overwhelming, and it's not life or death situation, well, maybe you could take the job, and it could be a learning, skills stretching experience for you. I mean, how you gonna you gotta occasionally do things that are a little bit beyond your ability to get better, but not way above your ability where you're going to be floundering and leaving the deaf consumer without any recourse to knowing what's going on. All right, we got a few more here. So you need to be paid. And that was put in largely because, well, I mean, it's not fair, man. I mean, the deaf person, they're not. Okay, we can't afford to do this for free. If we're going to be available to interpret, we have to be able to get paid for it. So we're going to put it right in there that we're going to have to be paid. And that's ethical because it's in the Code of Ethics. See what we did there? Okay, so interpreters and translators shall function in a manner appropriate to the situation. Okay, seems fair enough. That's nice and broad, whatever the situation is. And further your knowledge, continuing education stuff. We already talked about that briefly. Certification maintenance program. And be a member of RD. There you go. Here's your Code of Ethics. This is interesting. This was in the works. This was on the website when I was publishing the book, and then they didn't adopt it. So this is false. In 2004, they were trying to put out a different set. This was the sandbox playground version, and that's not what they ended up publishing. They had a 7 tenets of Code of Professional Conduct, and that's not anywhere in the book, but it might not be lasting very much longer. RD certification. So you can be certified as an interpreter. RD does not certify anymore transliteration. They never actually did. Well, actually they did. They certified oral transliteration. But the CT was not a sign language transliteration. It wasn't ASL to tactile ASL. It was English and ASL that was modified with English in mind. It was probably a variant of ASL rather than to call it English wouldn't be the right label. We got a number of different certifications in here. We have old certifications. The CSC was the old Comprehensive Skills Certification. That was replaced by the the CI and the CT, which were Certificate of Interpreting, Certificate of Transliteration. In the beginning, transliteration was thought of being that signing that's more English-like. It's the wrong label. It was never the right label, and we finally stopped certifying it with the wrong label. We just call it what it is, interpreting. That's a variety of interpreting, but it's still interpreting. Local test administrators can arrange the test for you. And the certification system is part of the triangle of professionalism. What is that? Well, we got a picture. Let's look at it. Hey, look at that picture. We got certification maintenance. So I've got to maintain, I've got to continually educate myself. Every 4 years, I have to have 8 CEUs, or an average of 20 instructional hours per year. Now, I could do all 80 hours in the last 2 months before my time period ends up. There's no requirement it be spread evenly. It just needs to be done within the 4-year time limit. I have the certification exam, so I don't maintain my certification until I get my certification. And then I have ethical practices, which says, oh, I could screw up. I can keep taking my training, but I could just be a horrible, ethically challenged human being. And, the confidential information might just be a foreign concept to me, and I just keep telling everybody everything. So what does that mean? That if that's what I do, I could be at risk. Well, I could be at risk of losing my certification, although my understanding is that has never happened yet. No, there's got to be there's a couple of cases where people were kicked out of the organization. Maybe they weren't certified. Okay. Because they were just such egregious things, like essentially selling the contents of the certification system. I was like, that's not really what you were supposed to do, and that was very expensive to us, and now we have to make a new test. You get to pay for it. or we're going to do our best to get some money out of you to pay for it. Certification maintenance program, we talked about that already, so we move on. Wow. Professional studies is anything in language and culture-based things. So, at a, for example, college, any course in these topics should count as professional studies. If you wanted to take a college class, there's workshops. You don't have to take a college class at all. Okay, there we go. That's the basics. Can you answer these questions? I don't know. We'll